In Colorado, Governor Jared Polis previously signed legislation that is going to provide residents with a tax rebate. The state's Department of Revenue announced in an official statement that the governor signed a new law to give Coloradans a tax rebate of $750 for individual filers and $1,500 for joint filers this summer. This law will provide immediate relief to Coloradans by sending you a check this summer instead of spring 2023. The Colorado Department of Revenue is working hard to make sure that residents get the right tax refund as soon as possible. According to the state's Department of Revenue, for residents who received an extended tax filing deadline of October 17th, the tax rebate check will be received by January 31st, 2023. Other states have also signed similar legislation, including Georgia, Delaware, Idaho, and Indiana. Now, breaking news, everybody. Senate Democrat Joe Manchin is upset at Senate Minority Mitch McConnell for opposing the new changes on President Biden's economic agenda. Top Democrats in the Senate are now revising a new version of the Build Back Better legislation. The lawmakers would like to see a monthly benefit boost included to the bill. Top Democrats in the Senate are now revising a new version of the Build Back Better legislation. The lawmakers would like to see a monthly benefit boost included to the bill. And today, Joe Manchin said on top that he's not dissuaded by warnings from the top Senate Republican leader to sink a bipartisan bill that would only strengthen the U.S. economic competitiveness. Manchin told reporters, "I'm not walking away if I can help the country, and if they want to play politics and play party politics, shame on them." Manchin added it was so wrong of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky to issue warnings to sink the bipartisan legislation, which would only boost the federal investment on emerging technologies like computer chips. The Kentucky Republican reiterated the ultimatum and tied to recent Democratic efforts to pass Biden's economic agenda. And during a speech on the Senate floor, McConnell said, "Party line scheming is going to crowd that out. Our side cannot agree to frantically steamroll through bipartisan talks in order to meet a timeline, so our Democratic colleagues can clear the decks to ram through a party line tax hike." McConnell warned and wanted to sink the bill as Democrats make progress towards clinching a deal with Manchin on a climate and tax economic spending package. But a spokesperson for Chuck Schumer said last week that Democrats plan to convene an all-senators classified briefing for the bipartisan bill. Republicans and Democratic negotiators have spent months negotiating on the bill to shore up the domestic semiconductor industry, among other sectors, in an effort to reduce the U.S. dependence on imports of important products. Experts say Biden's economic package could include around $1 trillion in new spending. These ideas would require a range of tax increases to fund them. These taxes would mostly hit businesses, owners, and corporations, at least according to the current proposals that lawmakers are considering. And Sam Runyon, Manchin's communications director, told Yahoo News in a statement that Senator Manchin insists that any final deal addresses inflation.
Pinch of inflation, and all Americans are feeling this hurt. And just recently, I've heard stories about folks that are actually taking their goods, their jewelry, their electronics to pawn shops so they can get additional money to pay for gas. You know, this is really hurting the American people. And those pawn shop owners, one in particular in southwest Iowa, said that folks are just volunteering forward, that, you know, they don't have to say why they're pawning their household goods, but they are telling him that they need it for gas money. This is what Iowans are resorting to. Their wages are not keeping up with inflation, and we have an administration right now that simply doesn't care. And what is the Democrats' response to the economic hardship that not just Iowans but all Americans are facing? Is to raise taxes on them. They're pushing this reckless tax and spend bill all over again. Let's hike up taxes as we're facing a potential recession.
Early 1980s. Food costs are up more than 10%. Energy costs are up more than 40%. The cost of the fuel that drives us to work, delivers our goods, drives our economy, are all up over 60%. These are staggeringly bad numbers, and they were fueled directly by the reckless spending spree that Democrats ran through on party line just last year. Remember, right before the $2 trillion spending spree, President Biden said, quote, "The biggest risk is not going too big. It's if we go too small. The Senate Democratic leader said, quote, "I do not think the dangers of inflation, at least in the near term, are very real." These were gigantic unforced errors. One leading economist recently said the so-called American Rescue Plan was, quote, "arguably the biggest fiscal policy mistake in several decades," end quote. Our core inflation rate here in America is more than 2 percentage points higher than in Europe. Inflation is uniquely bad here because our all-Democratic government has made uniquely bad choices. And now American families are dealing with the fallout every single day. It's no secret how much the American people disapprove of the course Washington Democrats have put us on. They say so in poll after poll after poll. So you might think by now that our colleagues would be ready to try a different approach. Well, guess again. President Biden and his party, fresh off the spending America into inflation, now want to tax hike us into recession. They're behind closed doors playing around with what may amount to the single largest tax increase in American history. Tucked inside are exactly the sort of radical ideas that work.
The Biden administration finally has a brand new plan to fight inflation and help the American people. Millions of Americans may get extra $225 stimulus checks under this new stimulus proposal. Millions of people could get millions of Americans could also get additional cash payments of $225 under a new proposal. That comes as red-hot inflation continues, and qualifying residents in Indiana may soon see the relief. Indiana's Republican governor is also proposing a plan to send $225 payments to people in the state amid the highest inflation since 1981 by tapping into the state's growing budget surplus. The governor said he will call for a special legislative session before the end of June, so lawmakers can consider and potentially act on a plan that will total $1 billion in budget surpluses. He said Indiana residents have real needs right now during this period of high inflation, from the gas pump to buying groceries, and everyone should benefit from the state's success. The $225 check comes after about 4.3 million of the state's taxpayers began receiving $125 payments last month under the same law. According to the governor's office, if it's approved, each Indiana resident who has filed 2021 taxes would be eligible to now receive a combined total of about $350 in payments. Married couples filing jointly would also receive about $700. The additional deposit will be made to the bank accounts of eligible residents in Indiana who have filed their tax returns. And that's the good news I want to hear from everybody. Now, skyrocketing gas prices is definitely a huge problem for the White House, and while the administration began the month by pivoting heavily toward its economic message, experts say the attempt